Today we are going to do on American literature assignment 2022-23 we will follow because this is important for this year. Based on blocks 1 and 9. So it's the course code which is 06 oblique 2022-23. The second question, write a critical note on the dramatic form in the 20th century. 20th century drama starts during the 20th century, especially after World War One. Western drama became more internationally unified and less the product of separate national literary traditions. Throughout the century, realism, naturalism, and symbolism in various combinations of these continued to inform important plays. Among the many 20th century playwrights who have written what can be broadly termed naturalist dramas are Gerhard Hauptmann, a German, John Galsworthy, English, John Millington Synge, and Cinque O'Casey, Irish, and Eugene O'Neill, Clifford Odets, and Lillian Hellman, American. An important movement in the early 20th century was Expressionism. Expressionist playwrights tried to convey the dehumanizing aspects of 20th century technological society through such devices as minimal scenery, telegraphic dialogues, talking machines, and characters portrayed as types rather than individuals. So, notable playwrights who wrote expressionist dramas include Ernest Toller, Toller, George Kaiser, Kiser, German, Karl Kapex, Czechoslovakia, and Elmer Rice and Eugene O'Neill, American. The 20th century also saw the attempted revival of drama and verse, but although such writers as William Butler Yeats, W. H. Auden, T. S. Eliot, Christopher Fry, and Maxwell Anderson produced effective results, verse drama was no longer an important form in English. In Spanish, however, the poetic dramas of Federico Garcia Lorca are placed among the great works of Spanish literature. Three vital figures of 20th century drama are the American Eugene O'Neill, the German Bertolt Brecht, and Italian Luigi Pirandello. O'Neill's body of plays in many forms, naturalistic, expressionist, symbolic, psychological, won him the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1936 and indicated the coming of American drama. Brecht wrote dramas of ideas, usually promulgating socialist or Marxist theory. In order to make his audience more intellectually receptive to his thesis, he endeavored by using expressionist techniques to make them continually aware that they were watching a play, not vicariously experiencing reality. For Pirandello, too, it was a paramount to fix an awareness of his plays as theatre. Indeed, the major philosophical concern of his dramas is the difficulty of differentiating between illusion and reality. World War II and its attendant horrors produced a widespread sense of the utter meaninglessness of human existence. This sense is brilliantly expressed in the body of plays that have come to have known collectively as the theatre of the absurd. By abandoning traditional devices of the drama, including logical plot development, meaningful dialogue, and intelligible characters, absurdist playwrights sought to convey modern humanity's feelings of bewilderment, alienation, and despair, the sense that really is itself unreal. In their plays, human beings are often portrayed as dupes, clowns who, although not without dignity, are at the mercy of forces that are inscrutable. Probably the most famous plays of the theatre of the absurd are Eugene Ionesco's Bald Soprano and Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot. The sources of the theatre of the absurd are diverse. They can be found in the tenets of surrealism, dadaism, see dada, D-A-D-A, and existentialism. In the tradition of the music hall vaudeville and burlesque, and in the films of Charles Chaplin and Buster Keaton, playwrights whose works can be roughly classed as belonging to the theatre of the absurd are Jean Genet French, Max Frisch, and Frederick Durel-Matt. He was a Swiss. Fernando Arrabal, Spanish, and the early plays of Edward Albee, American. The pessimism and despair of the 20th century also found expression in the existentialist dramas of Jean-Paul Sartre, in the realistic and symbolic dramas of Arthur Miller, Tennessee Williams, and Jean Anouilh, and in the surrealist plays of Jean Cocteau. Somewhat similar to the theatre of the absurd is the so-called theatre of cruelty, derived from the ideas of Antonin Artaud, who, writing in the 1930s, foresaw a drama that would assault its audience with movement and sound, producing a visceral rather than an intellectual reaction. After the violence of World War II and the subsequent threat of the atomic bomb, his approach seems particularly appropriate to many playwrights. Elements of the theatre of cruelty can be found in the brilliantly abusive language of John Osborne's Look Back in Anger, 1956, and Edward Albee's Who is Afraid of Virginia Woolf. It is taught in many universities, written in 1962, both the dramas, 1956 and 62. In the ritualistic aspects of some of the Janet's plays, in the masked utterances and enigmatic silences of Pinter's comedies on menace, and in the orgiastic abandon of Joel Beck's Paradise Now. 1968, it was fully expressed in Peter Brook's production of Peter vs. Marat Sade, 1964. During the last third of the 20th century, a few continental European dramatists such as Dario Fo in Italy and Heiner Müller in Germany stand out in the theatre world. However, for the most part of the countries of the continent saw an emphasis on creative trends in directing rather than a flowering of new plays. In the United States and England, however, many dramatists, old and new, continued to flourish with numerous plays of the later decades of the 20th century and the early 21st century, echoing the trends of the years preceding them. Realism is a number of guises. In a number of guises, psychological, social, political, continued to be a force in such British work as David Story's Home, 1971, Sir Alan Ayckbourn's Norman Conquest Trilogy, 1974, David Hayes' Amy's View, 1998. In such Irish dramas as Brian Fry's Dancing of Lugnasa, 1990, and Martin MacDonald's 1990s Linux trilogy, and in such American plays as Jason Miller, That Championship Season, 1972, Langford Wilson, Tally's Folly, 1979, and John Guary's 6 Degrees of Separation, 1990. In keeping with the tenor of the times, many of these and other works of the period were marked by elements of wit, irony, and satire. A witty surrealism also characterized some of the late 20th century theatre, particularly the brilliant wordplay and startling juxtaposition of many plays of England's Tom Stoppard. In addition, two of the late 20th century America's most important dramatists, Sam Shepard and David Mamet, as well as their followers and imitators, explored American culture with a kind of hyper-realism, mingled with echoes of theatre of cruelty in the former Buried Child, 1978, the latter's Glengarry Glen Ross, 1983, and other works. While each exhibited his own very distinctive voice and vision, both playwrights achieved many of the effects through stark settings, austere language, and spare dialogue, meaningful sentences, silences, the projection of a powerful streak of menace, an outburst of real or implied violence. The late decades of the 20th century were also a time of considerable experiment and iconoclasm. Experimental dramas of the 1960s and 70s by such groups as Beck's Living Theatre and Georgy Grotowski polished laboratory theater, were followed by mixing and merging various kinds of media with aspects of postmodernism, improvisational technique, performance of art, and other kinds of avant-garde theater. Some of the era's more innovative efforts included productions by theater groups such as New York La Ma 1961 and Mabo Mines 1970 and Chicago Steppenwolf Theater Company 1976. The Canadian writer-director Robert Lepage intricate, sometimes multilingual works. Example, Tectonic Plates 1988, the inventive one-man shows of such monologuists as Eric Bogosian, Spalding Gray, and John Leguizamo. The transgressive drag dramas of Charles Ludonan's ridiculous theatre example, The Mystery of the Irma Vema Whip, 1984, and the operative multimedia extravaganza of Robert Wilson, for example, White Raven, 1999. Thematically, the social upheavals of the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, particularly in the civil rights and women's movements, gay liberations, and the AIDS crisis, provided impetus for new plays that explored the lives of minorities and women. Beginning with the Lorraine Hansberry, A Raisin in the Sun, 1959 drama by about African Americans emerged as a significant theatrical trend. In the 1960s, plays such as James Baldwin Blues for Mr. Charlie, Amri, Amiri Baraka's Hearing Dutchman's 1964, and Charles Gordon's No Place to Be Somebody 1967 explored Black American life. Writers including Ed Bullins, for example, The Taking of Miss Janny 1975, Tozake Shange example for colored girls who have considered suicide when the rainbow is ENUF 1976 and Charles Fuller. For example, the Soldiers Play 1981 carried these themes into later decades. One of the most distinctive and profile of the century is African American playwrights. August Wilson debuted on Broadway in 1984 with Ma Rainey's Black Bottom and continued to define the Black American experience in his ongoing dramatic cycle into the next century. Now, there are many other topics that are to be discussed, and we should continue accordingly. Feminist and other women centered themes dramatized by contemporary female playwrights were plentiful in the 1970s and extended in the following decades. Significant figures included England's Carol Churchill, for example, The Witty Top Girls 1982. The Cuban American experimentalist Maria Irene Flores, for example, Fefu and her Friends 1977, and American realists including Beth Henley, for example, Crimes of the Heart 1978, Marsha Norman, for example, Night Mother 1982, and Wendy Wasserstein, for example, The Heady Chronicles 1988. Skilled monologists also provided provocative female themed one-woman shows such as Eve Ensler's The Vagina Monologues 1996 and various solo theatrical performances by Lily Tomlin, Carrie Finlay, Anna Deavia Smith, Sarah Jones, and others. Gay themes often in forms of by gay playwrights also mark the later decades of the 20th century. Homosexual characters had been treated sympathetically, but in the context of pathology in such earlier 20th century works as Lillian Hellman's The Children's Hour 1934 and Robert Anderson's Tea and Sympathy 1953. Gay subjects were presented more explicitly during the 1960s, notably in the English farces of Joe Orton and Matt Crowley's witty but grim portrait of pre-Stonewall American gay life. The Boys in the Band 1968. In later years, gay experience was explored more frequently and with greater variety and openness, notably in Britain in Martin Sherman's Bent 1979, and Peter Gill's Mean Tears 1987, And in the United States, in Jane Chambers' Last Summer at Bluefish Cove, 1980. Harvey Fierstein's Talk Song Trilogy, 1981. Larry Kramer's The Normal Heart, David Henry Houns' The M Butterfly, 1988, which also dealt with Asian identity, and Paul Rudnick's Jeffrey, 1993. Tony Kushner's acclaimed two-part Angels in America, 1992. Noir in 92 is generally considered the century's most brilliant and innovative theatrical treatment of the contemporary gay world.